Tipp Today, in association with Slattery's of Pecan, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. Slattery'sGarage.ie.
Thanks, Pat, and welcome back to the second hour of Tipp Today, 1800 938 007. I'm joined now by independent Cllr Liam Browne. Good morning to you, Liam.
Good morning.
And thanks for taking our call this morning. A couple of things, Liam, because you were involved in the protests over the last week. You're making an interesting point, though. You're saying the government knew that the fuel protests were going to take place and that they did nothing. What informs you about that?
They did, Fran, and what informs me is I've seen the email that was sent to government 2 weeks ago. It was given to me by some of the guys on the protests that Tuesday evening, the day of the beginning of the protest. I think I put it up online on Wednesday. They were fully aware that there had been a meeting in Portlaoise amongst contractors, hauliers, agribusinesses, saying to the government that they were going to need help and they were going to need reductions in the costs of doing business. Otherwise, they would have had no option but to have a protest. But that was completely ignored. Basically, what the government said was they were going to talk to the established organisations like the Hauliers Association, like the IFA. But many of the people who were on the protest last week, they're not members of those organisations. They're not big businesses. They're, I suppose, in many cases, I call it the man in the van. You know, the person who needs a vehicle for work, who's not looking after 40, 50 lorries and has the power to be involved in a hauliers association which can meet government that's dropped the hat. But these people did get together, they did speak to government, they did send communication to government and ask the government to sit down and talk to them, and they were ignored, Fran.
Tell me, I mean, do you think that the protest has succeeded when you see the government package now, or do protesters feel that they've succeeded, Liam?
Look, there's been a level of success, Fran, because to be honest, there wouldn't be any package if they hadn't gone out onto the roads. So from that point of view, yes, there was some bit of success, but I don't think the package is good enough. I don't think it goes far enough. I think it's going to cause even bigger problems for a lot of the people who were out on the protest, and also for householders. You know, it's short term. We're stuck once again with short term thinking. To me, it was something put together over a weekend just to stop the protests. But you know, if we don't have a proper long term view, proper long term planning of one, fuel security, and two, secure prices that people can plan their business and make business decisions into the future, well, I think we're just running down the road of even bigger problems in the future.
Now, the government would tell you, and I was speaking to Minister Patrick O'Donovan just before 10 o'clock there now, that, you know, it's not an open-ended purse in terms of the availability of monies here, and, you know, we have to look to the future and the possibility of things going really wrong on a global scale. What do you make of that argument from the government, Liam?
I listened to Patrick O'Donovan, and I'm going to be absolutely honest, it was a belligerent interview. It was an interview that was, in my opinion, completely out of touch. Again, you know, Patrick O'Donovan is a minister who is very used to talking down to people. I've listened to him in the past. I think he's done it once again there on your radio station. I'm quite angry after listening, to be quite honest. He didn't seem to give any indication of any sympathy towards the problems that people felt. And I'm going to be absolutely honest about it, Fran. You know, politically, an awful lot of the people who were on the protest last week, you know, from the farming community and, you know, the small business community, would have been Fine Gael supporters in the past. And I can't imagine how too many of them would be happy listening to Patrick O'Donovan talking down to him like he just did on the radio this morning. Look, a package had to be put together. But the reality is we're seeing that the people in small haulage businesses, small business people, and ordinary householders are struggling for a long time now. It's not just today or yesterday or last week that they decided that, you know, enough was enough. This has been something which has been building up over the past. Now, if you put in a package which runs out at the end of June, what then, Frank? Do all the prices go back up? Do the rebates disappear? How is anybody supposed to sit down and sign a contract that goes beyond 3 months? How is anybody supposed to take a job? This is going to cost more businesses, Frank, because people are just not going to take a chance. And I'm not sure your listeners probably don't know it yet, but, you know, a major agricultural contracting business in Navan this morning decided to shut up shop. and close down, because they said they cannot plan into the future with the way things are going. And then you have Patrick O'Donovan coming out. And, a lot of what was said by government last week, and a lot of what was said by government spokespeople last week, made people very, very angry. And I think, it's just shown that the likes of Patrick O'Donovan is still not listening. He's still, there was very much a let them eat cake about what he just said there now. That we have to do this, and people don't understand, the tough job that Patrick O'Donovan has to do. But it's really tough, getting up at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning to go out to work and not sure you won't be able to afford the petrol or diesel when it gets to the station. That's really tough, Or coming home at the evening time and not sure, are you going to be able to turn on the heating oil? Are you going to be able to turn your heat to warm your house? That's pretty tough as well. And I guarantee you that's something that Patrick O'Donovan doesn't ever have to worry about.
And what he was questioning was not the legitimacy of some of the argument, but the blockades. And he was talking about the oil refinery, and he was talking about the fuel depots and the like. What do you say to that? And as you know, the government described that as sabotaging the nation.
Does Patrick O'Donovan honestly think, that those people wanted to be on the road for 6 days last week? Those are working people, The people who protested this week, and this was a big change from protests I've seen in the past, when people go up to Dublin for a couple of hours, and in all fairness, a lot of them are a bit of a jolly up in Dublin, walking down the street, shouting the same slogans over and over again. The people who I met last week, for 6 days, are people who did not want to be there. People who had lorries tied up for 6 days that could have been working, who had tractors tied up for 6 days that could have been working. These are people who just want a break, who just want to be listened to. And like I said at the start of the interview, and you asked me about it, these were people who had told the likes of Patrick O'Donovan 2 weeks ago that they were going to have no option but to do what they did. What they did, was the last thing they could have done was to actually stand out on the road and be listened to. Because they wouldn't have been listened to, if they did. What we're constantly getting was, why don't you go to Dublin and why don't you protest at the Dáil? I've been up to the Dáil, and I'm sure you've been up to the Dáil. There's 3 or 4 protests walking up and down in front of the gates of Dáil every single day. And I guarantee your listeners will find it hard to name one of them or what they're protesting for, because they're ignored by the government as well. You'll get a couple of TDs, the local TDs will come out to them, they'll offer to bring him in and buy him a cup of coffee, and they'll offer to sit down and listen to him, and we'll do nothing about it. Let me just give you an example, We've heard the crying out of government last week about people missing hospital appointments. And I have huge sympathy about anybody who missed a hospital appointment or who missed treatment. But that was used as an excuse against the protesters. We don't hear anything about the scoliosis patients who've been waiting 6 and 7 years of missing treatments. We don't hear anything about the people who are on, I spoke to a man yesterday whose daughter is on a 12-month waiting list for to be looked at by an ophthalmologist, because they're afraid that their future sight will be damaged in the long term. But you'll come out and you'll say, oh yeah, Mary missed an appointment to the doctor. I was at the protest. They were letting people through. They were asking people if they need to go through. Ambulances were pushed without any hassle. Sorry, I'm a little bit angry now even saying this. We're listening to the likes of Patrick O'Donovan coming on with his attitude and the way he talked down to people and the way he continues to talk down to people. That's what the people on the protest were so annoyed about. They feel that they are the ones who are the backbone of the country. They pay their taxes. They work. They've one of the highest tax regimes on fuel in Europe. And yet they get talked down to when they talk back, when they have the temerity to talk back to government. Because that's the attitude that Micheál Martin had, that Jim O'Callaghan had, that Simon Harris had, and listen this morning to Patrick O'Donovan. How dare these people talk back to them? Well, maybe they should talk back to them an awful lot more and an awful lot louder, because I don't think Patrick O'Donovan was listening last week to what was said. As far as he was concerned, the people who were on the roads were not more than an inconvenience to him and his colleagues.
Well,
sorry for saying that.
Well, he said he promoted the notion that people should have the right to protest, and that, sometimes he felt like protesting himself. And I think the point that he was making was that how far it went in terms of what they are now calling the blockades and stuff. Is it done now, Liam? Is this done now?
I don't think so, Frank. I genuinely don't think so.
Will people go back on our motorways now, do you think? Is it?
Whether they will or they won't, I'm not sure. I would hate to think they would have to. And that's what we should be doing. We should be listening an awful lot more to ordinary people. Like, for example, Frank, nothing was done on home heat fuel in the package. Yeah. Absolutely nothing. Now, we're probably lucky that we're heading into the middle of April and coming on to May, and the temperatures outside are going up a bit. So we don't need it as much as we did. But, if this had been last October, would they have done the same thing?
Right, well, they did a few cent. They did a few cent to it, but I mean the point there is that the European directives are determining what they can do about the home heating oil.
Fine. We've got to give up on this. The European directives. The European directives don't seem to be able to tell the Spanish what to do when they're selling petrol for 150 a litre, or the Maltese when they're selling diesel for 121.
So what are you saying, Liam, that we're not fighting our cause enough in Europe? Is that it?
Yeah, we're not. We're not fighting our cause in Europe. We're going. Do you know what it is, Fran? We have the presidency of the European Union coming up, and Micheál Martin is fighting his life of saying boo to anybody in Europe because he wants to be paraded around Europe like the best boy for 6 months. Like, the Polish, and funnily enough, I spoke to quite a few Polish people on the protest who came out and protested the same way. That maybe they're a bit better to protest than the Irish because of their own past. Like, the Polish government dropped VAT from 23% to 8%, a 15% drop in VAT for a period of time until we get over the hump. We've our guys coming out going, oh, we can't drop that. Oh, we can't drop this. We can't drop that. The reality is, Fran, the Irish government set out a budget last October, and they had an estimate for fuel. They had an estimate for tax take on fuel for the next 12 months based on a cost of fuel that was an awful lot lower than it is now. They've been making a profit while this has been going on, Fran. Every single time the price of petrol at the pump goes up by 10 cents, that's an extra 6 cents to the government. I mean, like, they could bring it back to the price that they made the estimate on in the first place back last October. But
surely one of the positives around this, Liam, has to be that at least there's a conversation opening up now about carbon tax.
Absolutely. And Fran, look, I've been talking about that on your show God knows how many times. Carbon tax is a scam, Fran. And we're going to have people coming on from the environmentalist point of view and from the green point of view talking about, the world is going to burn up in 2 months' time if we don't put on carbon tax. The reality is, Fran, we're trying to save the world by increasing tax in Ireland. And we have the Americans and Iranians and Chinese and God knows what, burning coal all over the place, bombing the crap out of Iran. I mean, what are they fooling us? It's like UFC, Fran. It's a nice way of saying, we have to put on a tax to help people. But it's only temporary. It's only until we get the climate under control. It's only until we retrofit all these houses. I mean, you said yourself this morning there, Fran, many of the retrofit schemes that are coming in, most people can't afford them. It's easy to give somebody a grant of €4,000 off of their doors and windows if they spend €20,000 to put the windows in. How many people can afford to do that nowadays? It's basically, to my mind, it's directing money into people's pockets who already can prove that they don't need the money in the first place. I mean, it's really unfair. But every single person has to pay the cost of it. It doesn't matter whether you can afford new windows or doors or not, or whether you can afford solar panels or not. You still have to pay the carbon tax that's going to go to the grant for the people who can afford those things. It's not fair, Fran.
Is there some sort of seismic shift, do you think, in this country that was kicked off last week?
I do think that. I absolutely do think that. I tell you, I'll go back to something I said a few minutes ago. There's been protests up and down this country for years. And it's the same lads at the front of the protests with the loud hailers making up a catchy slogan, walking down O'Connell Street from the Garden of Remembrance down to the end of the street. And it's all forgotten about after about 2 days. And they're waiting for the next protest to go on. The people who protested last week, Fran, are ordinary working people. There are people who never go to a protest on a normal day. They're Fianna Fáil voters, they're Fine Gael voters who are extremely unhappy with the people that they voted for and how they've been treated and how they treated them. They just want to get on with their life. The social contract, in my opinion, is broken at this stage. We have people who just thought that their job was to, get up out of bed and go to work, pay their taxes, buy themselves a house, put their kids through college. Those kids then would come out with a decent education. They would get a job. They would buy a house. They would have kids, and the cycle would carry on. We're now left in a stage, Fran, where our brightest and best are getting on planes once again, going to Australia and England and America. When they're trying to buy a house, Fran, they cannot afford a house, and God only knows what the cost of the increased fuel will have on construction costs over the next 12 months. We're coming out of college with good educations but bad wages, but the cost of everything has gone up.
Can I ask you finally, Liam, the relationship with the Gardaí, has that been damaged?
I think some people have seen the Gardaí act in a way that they didn't think they would. I would hate to think that I'm going to be honest. I would hate to think the relationship with the Gardaí is damaged. The Gardaí have a tough job. I mean, yesterday evening, I came away from the protest yesterday evening, and I got a phone call from a person who needed Garda assistance in Cashel, and the guards went down and they sorted it out within an hour. The ordinary Garda on the ground is a decent person, just want to go to work. But I think that the minister left his own people down last week. I think that what happened in Whitegate was disgraceful. I think it was way over. No Garda should ever need to pull pepper spray out on an ordinary person as a demonstration. Because as you're saying there, Patrick O'Donovan will come on and say that people have the right to protest. But then when they protest, they're beaten off the streets by Gardaí and pepper sprayed. I know it could have turned nastier, and it could have turned nastier among people who I guarantee have never had an interaction with the Gardaí in a bad way in their life, who are going to be left with an awful sour taste in their mouth.
What the minister would probably say to you there is that if the Gardaí didn't intervene like that, we'd all be sitting with no diesel or petrol in our cars this week. So
no fun. I'll tell the minister what. If the minister had sat down last Tuesday evening with people and spoke to them, if they hadn't turned away the leaders of the protest from Leinster House on Wednesday, last Tuesday it was said to the government, this can all finish in 5 minutes if they just agree to talk. They didn't agree to talk. Friend, Micheál Martin threatened to bring the army out on his own people. I think Micheál Martin should resign. I genuinely do. I think it's time for him to go now. If the only way you can, if the only way you can have a discussion with ordinary decent people about the plight they're suffering in their life,
it was Jim O'Callaghan
put the army on them.
Right, but it was the Minister for Justice that came up with that. So in terms of the
they act in lockstep, Fran. They have cabinet responsibility. The Minister for Justice didn't say anything that he wasn't told to say.
Well, he's at odds with Helen McEntee over this now. So
Of course he is, because Helen McEntee at least has good sense to realise that you should never threaten to put the army out on your own people, and that hasn't happened. We're not a tin pot dictatorship. We're not something that that out in the middle of Africa. But that was the first response. And another thing, Fran, before we go, I'd like to say that I'm really, really annoyed about it, with the demonisation of people on the protest and this whole far right nonsense again, Fran. This is the new bogeyman. The protests have been infiltrated by the far right. The protests have been led by the far right. They haven't. They were led by ordinary people who just want to go about their day's work. But is that what the government are going to come out with every single time now? If you wave a tricolour, Fran, you're some sort of far right lunatic. I mean, talking about Tommy Robinson potentially being behind protests. That's only scare tactics to actually stop people from lifting their head and talking up and talking back to them, Fran. If we can't have a proper political discussion in this country without that being thrown at anybody who has the temerity to talk up for themselves, well, then I think we're going to have to ask what the people on the other side of the discussion want from people, because that should not have happened either.
All right.
The people on those protests were not far right, Fran, but I tell you one thing, they were far wrong either.
All right, Liam, thanks.
They should have spoke up for themselves, and they did, and fair play to them.
All right, thanks, and good morning to you, Liam. That's Councillor Liam Browne speaking to us from Cashel this morning. 1800 938 007.
Tipp FM's Tipp Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie.